But he stood tall in the House of Commons last Wednesday. I commend everybody to read Neil's speech, because it is a serious House of Commons speech about self-determination. And as you rightly said tonight, if we could persuade our allies in the SNP to give up on self-identification and concentrate on self-determination, then we can get Scotland back on the right road to independence. When Neil introduced his bill in the House of Commons, he was, and I've counted this, the 51st Member of Parliament since 1887 to introduce either a self-government, a home rule, an independence referendum bill in the House of Commons. And he joined a long line of great political figures. He quoted Gladstone, and in his speech he could have quoted Keir Hardie or Tom Johnston as the torch was passed on these bills, from the Crofting Liberals to the Labour Party to the Independent Labour Party to the SNP. But in that 51 bills, there is one single one, which wasn't proposed by a home ruler, but was proposed by a dedicated unionist member of Parliament. And I have to take you back 30 years, almost to the day, to the 11th of February 1993, when the Honourable Member for North Tayside, Bill Walker, rose to his feet and proposed the Scottish Separation Bill, which we call for short Bill's Bill. So Bill proposed Bill's Bill on the 11th of February 1993. I was there, and what I'm going to tell you is dead true. So Bill stood up and he said, "Madam Speaker," because Betty Boothroyd was the Speaker of the House of Commons, he said, "I appear before this House in full Highland regalia, not only with these cowardly truths, but full Highland regalia, full Highland kill, to propose this bill on this very serious subject, because I have a way forward if the Scots would like to separate. Then what they should do is this: get a petition of 50% of the entire population plus one and present it to this Honourable House. Then we would have a cooling off period of 2 years, and then a 25-year moratorium on the question, and then the matter." And Bill was proposing this 10-minute rule, just like Neil last Wednesday. And as Bill was enjoying for him this considerable triumph cheered on by the Conservative and Unionist benches, there stirred in the back, beside the gangplank of the House of Commons, on the government side, Bill's greatest enemy in life, his neighbouring Conservative MP for Perth and Kinross, succeeded once or twice, removed by Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, incidentally, Nicky Fairbairn, who had breakfasted and lunched well and was fast asleep until he heard the words, "I appear before the House in full Highland regalia," and Nicky woke up, and he had his silver cane with him. And as Bill was droning on, oblivious to what was going on around him, Nicky walked down the gangplank of the House of Commons on the government side, looked across to myself and John McCallion and the other folk that were there, and went, gently lifted the hem of Bill's kilt with his cane, goes like this, turns to us and goes, and we're like buzz, never mind a shiver, looking for a spine, a buzz. So we're saying, what's coming next? Goes back to his seat once again and sits down. Now Bill ends his speech, and this is a major issue for the nation, and the 50% one and the 25-year cooling off period, and I commend the speech in the House. And sits down to cheers from the Tory benches. Nicky gets up and says, "Madam Speaker, Marble friend Biggles," well, he called him Biggles because Bill Walker claimed to have flown every plane known to man, you know. Biggles, Mr. Walker, the honourable member for North Tayside, has told this House that he has appeared before us in full Highland regalia. He has misled us. He is wearing a pair of little red panties! And the whole thing dissolved in complete chaos. So, I went up to Nicky and I said to him the magic words which always commanded his attention. Can I buy you a drink? And 2 seconds later, there we were in the smoke room of the House of Commons, and I said, Nicky, well, that was brilliant. You absolutely punctured the balloon. And he said, yes, I did, didn't I? Yeah. I said, but listen, you couldn't see anything. And I said, no, but I knew they were there. I said, how did you know they were there? He said, well, because Biggles and I went on a visit with the Conservative Friends of Israel to the Sinai Desert last year. 110 bloody degrees, and Biggles is wearing his kilt. A grizzled Israeli veteran who had shot down 50 Syrian MiGs is telling us the advantages of an F-111 over a MiG. And Biggles, of course, had to pipe up and say, the trouble with you chaps is you don't understand the avionics. To which the Israeli major said, well, why don't you show us, Mr. Walker? And like a damn fool, Biggles climbed up into the cockpit, I whipped out my camera and I took the photo of the panties! And he said, when I'm dead and gone, as he was 3 years later, he said, I'm going to have my funeral at Fordale Castle. And Biggles will be there. And he won't be there to pay his last respects. He'll be looking for the negatives. Now listen, I have told this story, but last time I told it was about 15, 20 years ago. You rekindled my memory when you rose, but not in full Highland regalia like tonight. And we won't go into anything else about it. But you rekindled it. But people have always said, look, come on, you made it up, it never happened. The wonders of modern technology. I have the Hansard here. And the last bit of the Hansard before Bill's bill got beat by 180 votes to 28 is, and it's here, Sir Nicholas Fairbairn, perfect Ross. On a point of order, Madam Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for Tayside North, suggested he was in Highland dress. He's nothing of the kind. He misled the House. I have reason to believe he is wearing little red pants. Now, what happened 30 years ago is that we had a first modern surge towards independence. In the 1992 election, we lifted the SNP vote from 14% to 21%, fighting on for the first time in the SNP's 60-year history on an independence platform. That's the first time they fought an independence platform. Now, we didn't sweep the boards, we had 3 MPs, but we did increase the vote by 50%. And by toil and work from activists through the 1990s, we got to a position where we had a Scottish Parliament, which Bill Walker certainly thought was a pipe dream, and most people thought was a fantasy. And 8 years after that, we elected the first nationalist administration in that Parliament. And as we've heard earlier on, 4 years after that, we burst the system, elected by majority, and held the referendum on independence. That work, not just my work, or the work of the MPs, the work of the leadership, was arduous, it was difficult. We had to confront some of the fears in Scottish society. We had to tell the Catholic community that we weren't going to turn Scotland into some sort of Northern Irish statelet, that they would be valued in their role in an independent Scotland. We had to say to the Asian community they would be welcome as part of a tartan that we are proud to call Scotland. We had to say to the business community that Scotland's going to be a country where hard work, enterprise is not frowned upon, but it's celebrated. All of these fears that people had to be gradually eroded so as we could get to the point where we had a chance of gaining our independence, and no part of the Scottish community would feel threatened or isolated or disregarded or not appreciated. And that strategy, and that's what it was, I thought this was well understood. I thought everybody who wanted to see an independent country understood that you must open your heart and your mind to every part and section of that population. But to get to a position where you say to a majority of our people that you cannot have single-sex spaces prized and worked and strived for because of some daft ideology imported from elsewhere, and as we've seen, imperfectly understood by its proponents in Scotland, borders on the totally absurd. And the 6% decline in independence vote over a month, and think about that, 30 years of gradually building, till we get independence over 50% and then throw it away in some self-indulgent nonsense, which even if it was right, which it isn't, would hardly be tactically the most astute manoeuvre when you're meant to be taking Scotland to its next date with destiny. So, give up the self-identification, embrace self-determination is not just a simple slogan, it's as far as the Alba Party could do, an instruction to the national movement to get back on course and set our sights back on the prize. Last year, Scotland was promised a referendum on October the 19th this year. Get the date in your diary. That is the date it's going to be. No ifs, no buts. Leave to one side the ridiculous nonsense of appealing to the London Supreme Court to give us their guidance. What did you think they were going to say? I mean, well, Lord Reid, you Scottish Conservative, you establishment man to your fingertips, you man of principle who was willing to stay as the presiding officer of the Hong Kong court even after the Chinese government were overruling your rulings. Yeah? We'd wonder what you think of the idea of breaking up Britain. I mean, I just have to step back and think, what on earth? Are people so immersed on the day-to-day travails of trying to run a government badly? Are they so caught up in the difficulties of ferries or the tragedy of the health service just now that they can't even think rationally about you have to build a case to independence and provide an opportunity for the people? Well, luckily, despite everything, and no planning intended, it is possible to provide that opportunity this year. After all, on October the 19th. Because one of the byproducts of the referendum in 2014, one of the only things that was actually conceded in the vow, was the ability of the Scottish Parliament to amend the Scotland Act to be in charge of its own elections. Currently the rules say you need 2/3 to dissolve the Parliament, but you can amend the Act with a simple majority to make it a simple majority to dissolve the Parliament. There is nothing to stop the Scottish Parliament majority amending the Act and dictating a plebiscite election for October the 19th this year. Why was Holyrood better than Westminster? Westminster's a nonsense. It's the most difficult place to get a majority. Why? Because the election will be Keir Starmer replacing the Tories. Independence will not dominate that election campaign, even though we would fervently wish it to do, and it's more difficult. It's more difficult. The key to winning a majority for independence is to say to the 25% of people who believe in independence but still vote Labour that you can vote for independence in this referendum or election. You really think they're going to do that when it looks like Starmer's going to stumble into Downing? Well, luckily, despite everything, and no planning intended, it is possible to provide that opportunity this year. After all, on October the 19th. Because one of the byproducts of the referendum in 2014, one of the only things that was actually conceded in the vow, was the ability of the Scottish Parliament to amend the Scotland Act to be in charge of its own elections. Currently the rules say you need 2/3 to dissolve the Parliament, but you can amend the Act with a simple majority to make it a simple majority to dissolve the Parliament. There is nothing to stop the Scottish Parliament majority amending the Act and dictating a plebiscite election for October the 19th this year.